There was no woman in the history of the 19th century whose birth so clearly heralded a triumph and whose fate so ruthlessly denied it. She was born with the blood of the world's two greatest empires in her veins, yet she died belonging to neither. She was a paternal granddaughter of Queen Victoria and a maternal granddaughter of the Russian Emperor Alexander II. Flowing through her veins were the icy Victorian discipline and stiffness of the Windsors, alongside the unbridled, at times destructive passion of the Romanov dynasty. By all human and political metrics, there was simply too much to this girl for a single European family to comfortably contain. Without the slightest hint of an accent, she spoke 3 languages: Russian, German, and English. She was a magnificent oil painter, creating deep, sometimes unsettling landscapes, and she was even better in the saddle, breaking the most headstrong horses. She had thick golden brown hair and a straight, piercing gaze that others found either absolutely mesmerizing or deeply uncomfortable, often within the span of the very same conversation. Her name was Victoria Melita, but to her loved ones, to the tight-knit circle of cousins, kings, and grand dukes, she would forever remain Ducky. This affectionate pet name stood in striking contrast to the monumental and tragic figure she became in European history. Her life was not merely a chronicle of court balls, splendid ceremonies, and dynastic alliances. It was a story of existential rebellion. In an era when royal daughters were viewed exclusively as diplomatic commodities, faceless pieces on a geopolitical chessboard, Ducky chose, time and again, to be a human being rather than a soulless doll. The price she had to pay for that right proved to be overwhelmingly high. The story of Victoria Melita began on November 25, 1876, in the sun-drenched San Anton Palace on the island of Malta. Her birthplace was no coincidence. Her father, Prince Alfred, Duke of Edinburgh, the second son of Queen Victoria, was a career officer in the British Royal Navy and was commanding ships in the Mediterranean at the time. Malta was the heart of Great Britain's naval power, and it was in honor of this rocky, sun-baked island that the newborn princess received her second exotic name, Melita. To Ducky's mother, Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna, Malta felt like a saving grace. As the daughter of the Tsar liberator Alexander II, she had grown up in the breathtaking, almost Byzantine luxury of the Winter Palace, and she never truly managed to fit into foggy, thrifty, and prim England. To Maria Alexandrovna, the British royal court felt petty bourgeois, dull, and unjustifiably strict. To the end of her days, she never reconciled with the fact that, upon marriage, she was required to become a proper Protestant and submit to harsh Victorian rules. She respected her husband, Prince Alfred, for his naval prowess, but their family life was far from ideal. The Duke of Edinburgh possessed rather average intellectual abilities and, over time, developed a heavy, destructive dependency on alcohol. The childhood of Ducky and her sisters, the elder Maria, who would later become Queen of Romania, and the younger Alexandra and Beatrice, unfolded in constant travels between England, Malta, and Coburg. Yet, the most vivid, overwhelming, and at the same time frightening space for young Victoria Melita was Russia. Their mother regularly took the children back to her homeland, to St. Petersburg. There, among the endless enfilades of the Winter Palace, the mirrored halls, hundreds of liveried servants, and the mind-boggling luxury of the Russian imperial court, Ducky first felt what it truly meant to be a part of the Romanovs. But this luxury had a dark, ominous reverse side. The world of her Russian childhood seemed unshakable, but beneath its facade, deadly cracks were already yawning. In 1893, the family's life changed dramatically. Prince Albert's elder brother, the childless Duke Ernst II of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, passed away. Since Queen Victoria's eldest son, Edward, Prince of Wales, had renounced his rights to the German succession, the title and vast estates in the very heart of Germany passed to Ducky's father, Prince Alfred. The family moved permanently to Coburg, settling in the majestic Ehrenberg Palace. For 13-year-old Victoria Melita, this relocation was a blessing. Ducky was blossoming into a strikingly attractive, though highly complex, young woman. Her upbringing was overseen by a strict governess, Frau von Weimar, who tried in vain to curb the princess's turbulent nature. Victoria Melita was nothing like the classic, obedient German or English princesses of the time. She detested empty chatter about dresses and court gossip. She poured her true emotions onto canvas, disappearing for hours into her art studio, or galloped away through the Thuringian forests, displaying a flawless and reckless writing style. It was during this period that Coburg became a regular gathering place for Queen Victoria's massive family clan. Cousins from every corner of Europe descended upon this green, quiet part of Germany. And it was here, during one of these family celebrations, that Ducky met the man who would turn her entire soul upside down. His name was Kirill Vladimirovich. He was her maternal first cousin, the son of Grand Duke Vladimir Alexandrovich and Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna, and a nephew of her own mother. Tall, stately, with the impeccable military bearing of a naval cadet and an easygoing, ironic disposition, Kirill instantly won Victoria Melita's heart. Between them flared that pure, youthful, yet incredibly deep feeling that happens only once in a lifetime. They spent hours walking down shaded alleys of Coburg's parks, talking about everything under the sun and understanding each other without words. But this love was doomed from the start. According to the canons of the Orthodox Church, marriages between first cousins were strictly forbidden. Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna was horrified when she noticed her daughter's dangerous closeness with her Russian cousin. She knew perfectly well that the imperial house of Romanov would never sanction such a union. Kirill was hastily sent back to Russia with strict orders to forget his Coburg cousin. Ducky was left alone, hiding her emotional wound from prying eyes behind a mask of icy indifference and haughtiness, earning her the nickname the Princess with the Tragic Eyes at court. While Ducky mourned her impossible love, European diplomacy and Queen Victoria personally had entirely different plans for her future. The aging British monarch, sitting on her throne at Osborne House, saw the dynastic marriages of her grandchildren as the only reliable instrument for maintaining a fragile political balance in a Europe torn apart by contradictions. The Queen's gaze fell on Darmstadt, the capital of the Grand Duchy of Hesse. Ruling there was her favorite grandson, Ernst Ludwig, known within the family as Ernie. He was the brother of Alex of Hesse, the future Russian Empress Alexandra Feodorovna. Queen Victoria decided that the fiery, strong-willed Victoria Melita would make the perfect match for the soft, melancholic Ernie. Victoria's mother eagerly supported the plan, hoping that marriage would drive all thoughts of Kirill Vladimirovich out of her daughter's head. Ducky herself was never asked. Submitting to the iron will of her crowned grandmother and the persistent coaxing of her parents, she gave her consent. On April 19, 1894, a grand wedding took place in Coburg. It was a historic event. Guests included Queen Victoria herself, the German Kaiser Wilhelm II, and the future Russian Emperor Nicholas II, who officially proposed to Alex of Hesse during those very days in Coburg. Amidst the universal jubilation, flowers, and fireworks, only two young people felt like strangers at this celebration of life. Following the wedding, the 19-year-old Grand Duchess Victoria Melita arrived in Darmstadt. Very soon, this quiet German town and its luxurious palace turned into a literal crystal cage for her. From its very first weeks, her marriage to Ernst Ludwig turned into a deep personal tragedy. They were completely, cosmically different people. Ernie was a man of a delicate, almost painfully sensitive psychological makeup. He adored silence, collected fine porcelain, patronized Art Nouveau artists, and spent vast state funds establishing the famous artists' colony on Matildenhöhe Hill. Victoria Melita, on the other hand, was a passionate, active nature, searching for deep existential meaning and movement. The atmosphere of the rigidly regimented Darmstadt court, where every step, gesture, and sigh was dictated by centuries-old protocol, was unbearable to her. She was suffocating in the role of a decorative element in someone else's empire. The chasm between the spouses grew rapidly. Their mutual alienation was exacerbated by rumors that began circulating in high society. It was whispered that Grand Duke Ernst Ludwig had a distinct weakness for young male courtiers. Ducky felt deeply insulted, lonely, and betrayed. Her sole consolation during these dark years was the birth of their daughter, Princess Elizabeth, on March 11, 1895. Victoria Melita loved the little girl with all her heart, pouring into her all the untapped reserves of her tenderness. Yet even this child could not mend the broken vessel of their union. Ducky refused to play the role of a happy wife in public. She demonstratively ignored official receptions, left for Coburg to visit her mother, or set off on dangerous horseback rides, shocking conservative Hessian society with her independent and rebellious behavior. By 1901, the situation in Darmstadt had become entirely intolerable. Living a lie went against the very core of Victoria Melita's character. In January of that year, news arrived from England of Queen Victoria's passing. The death of the matriarch of European monarchy lifted the last moral obligations from Ducky's shoulders. She realized she would not spend another day in this suffocating crystal cage. Going against the will of her entire, massive royal family, Victoria Melita did something that, in the early 20th century, was considered an absolute taboo: a social and dynastic suicide. She officially filed for divorce. For the ruling houses of Europe, this news came as a literal thunderbolt from a clear sky. A divorce in a royal family? The living memory of old Europe had simply never known such a thing. Her own uncle, the new British King Edward VII, was furious. Her cousin, the Russian Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna, came to hate Ducky forever for dealing such a shattering blow to the prestige of her beloved brother Ernie. Relatives turned their backs on her. Her name was dragged through the press, and she was openly scandalized in high society salons from London to St. Petersburg. Yet Ducky showed incredible courage. She chose the path of absolute honesty with herself. She refused to sacrifice her one and only life for the sake of hypocritical dynastic propriety, becoming the first woman of the high European aristocracy to openly sever unhappy marriage vows for personal freedom. On December 21, 1901, the Supreme Court of Hesse officially dissolved the marriage. By court order, their daughter Elizabeth was to spend 6 months with her father and 6 months with her mother. Victoria Melita packed her things, took her paintings, and left Darmstadt forever, returning to her mother's care in Coburg. She was free, but it was a freedom that smelled of ashes. A terrible tragedy soon followed. In the autumn of 1903, while visiting her uncle, Nicholas II, at the imperial hunting estate of Skierniewice in Poland, little Elizabeth suddenly fell ill with typhoid fever and died at the age of 8. Ducky's world collapsed. Her grief was boundless, and the accusations from her Hessian relatives, who believed the mother's divorce had brought a curse upon the child, nearly drove her to madness. Only a new, irresistible force could save her. That saving force proved to be her old love for Grand Duke Kirill Vladimirovich, which had never faded through her years of suffering. After her divorce, they met again, and the old feeling flared up with a new, consuming intensity. Kirill, who by then had become a brilliant naval officer, was ready to go to any lengths for Ducky. Yet their union remained under the strictest prohibition. Emperor Nicholas II, who was under the complete influence of his wife, categorically refused to grant permission for the marriage. Church laws and the personal resentment of the empress merged into an insurmountable wall. On April 13, 1904, Kirill Vladimirovich almost lost his life. During the Russo-Japanese War, he was aboard the flagship battleship Petropavlovsk in the roadstead of Port Arthur. The ship struck a Japanese mine and sank within minutes. Admiral Makarov, the famous artist Vereshchagin, and hundreds of sailors perished. Kirill survived by a miracle. The blast wave threw him onto the deck, and though he suffered severe burns, a concussion, and hypothermia in the icy water, he lived. When the news reached Coburg, Ducky realized life was too short to waste on obeying the cruel orders of others. Barely recovered from his wounds, Kirill came to her. On October 8, 1905, in the Bavarian town of Tegernsee, secretly, in a simple and modest church, and without the Tsar's consent, Victoria Melita and Kirill Vladimirovich were wed. The consequences of this step were devastating. Upon learning of the secret wedding, Nicholas II flew into a rage. Grand Duke Kirill was stripped of all military ranks, dismissed from service, deprived of allowances from imperial funds, and most importantly, he and his newly wedded wife were permanently banned from crossing the borders of the Russian Empire. Thus began the Parisian period of their lives. For 4 years, they turned into exiles. In the eyes of St. Petersburg society, they were pariahs, stripped of titles. The Romanovs pointedly refused to recognize Ducky, forcing her to use the modest title of Countess Kirill. Yet this period of forced exile, paradoxically, became the time of their purest, most genuine and serene happiness. Stripped of the shackles of court protocol, they lived in Paris as private citizens. They settled in a cozy house, mingled with the French avant-garde, and hosted artists, writers, and musicians. Ducky painted extensively, enjoyed Parisian exhibitions and fashion, and most importantly, she felt loved and protected. Here in Paris, their two daughters were born, Maria in 1907 and Kira in 1909. The freedom that had been unavailable to them with the status of Grand Dukes filled their lives with meaning, proving to Ducky that her rebellion against the rules of the old world was entirely justified. Time and political reality gradually heal even the strongest monarchical anger. By 1909, Kirill Vladimirovich's position in the line of succession had changed significantly. Following the death of his father, Grand Duke Vladimir Alexandrovich, Nicholas II was forced to compromise. The Romanov family was thinning out, and the empire needed capable members of the dynasty. The emperor's wrath turned to mercy. Kirill's ranks were restored, his rights reinstated, and he was officially allowed to return to St. Petersburg with his family. For Victoria Melita, this return meant having to take the final step toward full integration into the world of the Romanovs. She made a conscious decision to convert to Orthodoxy. Yet, even in this sacred act, her famously stubborn character shone through. According to centuries-old tradition, when foreign princesses converted to Orthodoxy, their names were completely changed and given a new patronymic. Ducky, however, flatly and absolutely refused to change her name. She declared that she was born Victoria and would die Victoria. The court was shocked, but the emperor gave in. She was officially baptized under the name Victoria Fyodorovna. Before her, the name Victoria, considered strictly Western and English, had never been used as an official Orthodox name for a Grand Duchess in Romanov history. By a manifesto of Nicholas II, she was granted the title of Her Imperial Highness. The High Society of St. Petersburg welcomed the disgraced princess with clear prejudice, expecting to see a capricious, scandalous socialite obsessed with balls and dresses. But Victoria quickly shattered these illusions. Instead of empty social vanity, she actively and deeply immersed herself in the real life of the empire. Ducky engaged in large-scale, meaningful charity work. She opened model orphanages, founded art schools, supported young Russian painters, and logistically modernized medical aid structures. In her luxurious palace on Glinka Street, a completely different St. Petersburg gathered, intellectual, creative, and far removed from the stale atmosphere of Tsarskoye Selo's seclusion. Ducky became one of the most vibrant, influential, and respected figures of the pre-revolutionary capital. In August 1914, the world that had seemed eternal exploded. The First World War began. And it was during these terrible years that Victoria Feodorovna, her character, manifested in its full, monumental strength. While many high society ladies limited themselves to posing for photographers in beautiful silk aprons at rear-line hospitals, Ducky went to the front lines. She categorically refused to stay in safe and well-fed Petrograd. Victoria Feodorovna became the chief organizer and the very soul of forward field hospital units and military hospital trains. She personally traveled to the very edge of the front lines, near Warsaw and into Galicia, under bullets and shelling. She witnessed the horrors of trench warfare, freezing corpses, gas attacks, and the gruesome, festering wounds of ordinary Russian soldiers. Her contributions to aiding the wounded were undeniable and unique. Ducky did not simply supervise hospitals from above. She personally managed the complex aspects of frontline logistics, purchased the latest medicines and dressings with her own funds, and organized an uninterrupted supply of clean water and food for the trains. Eyewitnesses recalled how the Grand Duchess, dressed in the modest uniform of a Sister of Mercy, stood for hours at operating tables, comforted dying soldiers in their native Russian language, and personally directed the loading of the wounded under artillery fire. Being at the front and regularly interacting with combat officers, Victoria Feodorovna felt more acutely than most in the House of Romanov that Russia was hurtling towards an abyss at full speed. Ducky made several desperate attempts to warn the imperial family of the danger. She personally traveled to Tsarskoye Selo, trying to open Nicholas II's eyes to the brewing collapse of governance, and begged him to remove Rasputin from the court to save the monarchy. But all her attempts hit a deaf, dull wall of misunderstanding and hostility from the Tsarina. Alexandra Feodorovna saw nothing in Ducky's actions but an old personal vendetta and the intrigues of her Coburg relatives. Victoria Feodorovna returned to the front with a heavy heart and a clear understanding that the old world was doomed. February 1917 found Victoria in Petrograd. The capital was boiling. Bread riots escalated into a general strike, and troops began defecting en masse to the side of the insurgent populace. Ducky's husband, Grand Duke Kirill Vladimirovich, found himself in a highly complex, tragic situation. As the commander of the Naval Guards, an elite military unit tasked with maintaining order in the capital, he bore direct responsibility for the lives of his sailors and officers under conditions where the abdicated emperor had issued no orders. It was during these mad March days that an episode occurred which would forever cast a heavy shadow over their family's reputation and become the subject of fierce debate among historians. Seeking to preserve order, prevent a bloody massacre within his unit, and save the lives of his officers, Kirill Vladimirovich led the naval guards to the Taurid Palace, swearing allegiance to the State Duma. Rumors instantly spread through the monarchist press and memoirs that the Grand Duke had arrived there wearing a revolutionary red ribbon on his chest, effectively betraying his cousin, the Tsar. Historians still argue today whether this ribbon actually existed, or if it was merely a myth launched by Kirill's enemies to permanently discredit his rights to the throne. But to Victoria, her husband's step meant one thing: they were trying to survive amidst the raging chaos. The revolution ruthlessly destroyed everything she had fought for: her organizations, her orphanages, her ideals. Very soon, the provisional government placed the Romanovs under house arrest. Ducky, who possessed iron self-control, personally went out to face drunken patrols to protect her daughters. The situation was worsened by the fact that the 40-year-old Victoria Feodorovna was pregnant with her third child. Staying in Petrograd meant certain death. In the summer of 1917, having secured official permission, the family managed to escape to Finland, which was still part of the disintegrating empire at the time. It was a humiliating, terrifying flight. A woman born into the luxury of royal palaces found herself in a filthy, overcrowded train among refugees and black marketeers, saving her children and her unborn child from death. They settled in a modest wooden house in the town of Porvo. Here, Amidst a severe shortage of food, firewood, and medicine, under the howling of winter Finnish winds, Victoria gave birth to her only son, Vladimir, in August 1917. Ducky chopped wood fire herself, washed clothes in freezing water, and cooked meager soup, while in distant Yekaterinburg and Petrograd, the Bolsheviks were executing her cousins, brothers, and sisters. The world of her youth drowned in blood, but she did not lose heart. In 1920, the family managed to relocate to Germany, to Coburg, to join Ducky's mother, and later settled in France, in Saint-Brieuc, a small fishing village tucked away on the rocky coast of Brittany. Here began the final, remarkable chapter of her earthly journey. In Exile, Victoria Melita's character revealed itself in its true, almost mythical grandeur. In 1924, her husband, Kirill Vladimirovich, as the senior male member of the dynasty among the survivors, issued a manifesto in which he proclaimed himself Emperor of all the Russias in exile, under the name Kirill I. Consequently, Victoria Melita assumed the title of Empress. In the eyes of a pragmatic Western world, this seemed absurd. An emperor and empress of a massive country living in a remote French province. But Ducky was not playing a game or pretending. She lived this mission. In Saint-Brieuc, Ducky established a literal mini court in exile, which became the main spiritual and organizational hub for the entire scattered, impoverished Russian emigration. She became the true soul of these people scattered across the globe. Victoria displayed a phenomenal, titanic capacity for work. She operated as a professional diplomat, a philanthropist, and a symbol of hope. Ducky personally penned thousands of letters to European monarchs, American bankers, and international organizations, begging for, tracking down, and securing financial resources to save Russian exiles dying of hunger and destitution in Paris, Berlin, and Belgrade. She organized relief committees and support networks, and she held charitable exhibitions of her own paintings, selling them for next to nothing just to send a wire transfer to another sick widow of an officer or to pay for the tuition of a Russian émigré student. Yet her personal life during this period was once again subjected to a cruel trial. Her marriage to Kirill Vladimirovich, for which she had sacrificed everything, began to fracture. In exile, Kirill, weary of depression and the lack of any real purpose, embarked on a long-term affair with a young émigré woman, an affair deeply humiliating to Ducky. Victoria knew about this infidelity. It was a terrible blow to her pride. Any other woman in her position would have caused a scandal or demanded a divorce. But Ducky showed a rare, superhuman strength of will. She forced herself to step over her personal drama and resentment for the sake of a higher cause. She did not allow a domestic scandal to destroy the unity of their family and their political mission. In front of the emigration and her children, she continued to stand firmly beside Kirill, remaining his primary, unshakable anchor, his advisor, and his protector to the very end. The final years of Victoria Melita's life were filled with a quiet, deep melancholy, and the realization that the world of her youth had changed forever and there was no going back. In the early 1930s, she watched with horror as Nazism reared its head in Germany. Turbulent discussions took place within émigré circles. Some right-wing forces hoped that Hitler would destroy the Bolsheviks and restore the Romanovs to the throne. Ducky initially shared these illusions, trying to find any leverage to save Russia. But she very quickly realized the true, sinister nature of the Nazi regime. All hopes for a triumphant return to St. Petersburg finally dissolved. Her health, undermined by the strains of the front lines, the difficult childbirth in Finland, and years of exhausting work for the sake of the emigration, deteriorated rapidly. In February 1936, during a trip to the German town of Amerbach for the christening of her grandson, the 59-year-old Victoria Melita suffered a severe stroke. She was left completely paralyzed. Kirill Vladimirovich did not leave her bedside for a single step, weeping and begging for forgiveness for all the suffering he had caused. But Ducky could no longer speak. On March 2, 1936, Victoria Melita of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha passed away. She was initially buried in the Saxe-Coburg family vault in Coburg, but history had prepared a final, deeply symbolic act of justice for her. Decades passed. The Soviet Union collapsed. On March 7, 1995, by decision of the government of the new Russia, and with active participation of her descendants, the remains of Victoria and her spouse, Kirill, were solemnly transferred from Germany to St. Petersburg. They were buried with full honors in the Grand Ducal burial vault of the Peter and Paul Fortress. This became her great, symbolic return to that homeland she had once chosen against the will of kings, which she had defended on the battlefields of the First World War, for which she had desperately fought in the poverty of exile, and in which she sacredly believed until her very last breath. Victoria Melita's life remained in history as eternal proof that a person's true greatness lies not in the splendor of their titles or the brilliance of crowns, but in the courage to choose one's own destiny, to stay true to oneself, and to preserve human dignity, even when the entire world around you is collapsing into oblivion. The fate of Victoria Melita is a poignant reminder that even behind the brilliance of a crown beats a human heart yearning for freedom. So, what has Ducky become to you after hearing this story? A daring rebel who broke the system, or a tragic figure who became a hostage of her time? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters to us. I read every single one of them. And if this story moved you, please subscribe and leave a like. It helps the channel reach more people who might have never heard her name. See you in the next video.